Have you ever felt like you are going crazy? Like you are the problem, or you are a problem to be fixed? You're thinking, why can't I just be like everyone else? Like, why do I have to make things so hard for myself? Why am I so rubbish? Who am I to think that I could ever be happy, have that incredible job, have a great relationship? And then this thinking just spirals, and before you know it, you're at home binge eating, you're on your second packet of biscuits, or you're down a bottle of wine, just full of self-loathing. This used to be me. My 20s were a decade spent trying to figure out like what was wrong with me and trying to make myself like better, quote unquote better, trying to make myself steady. I wanted my mind to be clear and supportive, and I really thought that I wanted to be worthy, and I thought I had to, again, quote unquote, be well to be worthy. So I put a lot of my energy into figuring out, what was the best way for me to eat, how to best move my body, lose weight, therapy. And side note, I'm so grateful I did the therapy. I love the therapy. But I was doing all these things aiming for this certain ideal, this type of consistency and steadiness that within myself, that I believed that if I could achieve, my life would be easier and way better, and I'd be more successful. And like I said, I'd be worthy. But I couldn't maintain this steadiness, this energy, this emotional stability, this confidence. I couldn't maintain it, and I hated myself for it. I was working so hard at it all, and I was putting a lot of money into it as well, and I totally fall short, and then I shame myself, and it could take me anywhere from a few days to a few months to recover. I just couldn't achieve this ideal that I was trying to get to, this steadiness, this consistency, this stability. The single most impactful self-awareness tool or intervention that stopped this, or that broke this cycle for me, was learning about the menstrual cycle. Learning that I was not meant to be the same every day. I told that story in the very first episode when I heard those words. And when I learned, particularly, when I learned how to support myself across a cycle, but particularly the pre-menstruum, and learning menstrual cycle awareness and this practice of charting and tracking my cycle and knowing where I am on any given day and what it is that I need. That whole body of work has been the most impactful. So today we're talking about the pre-menstruum phase, which is what I just described my experience of, and more specifically around those experience of PMS and the more difficulties and challenges that we can come up in this phase, because this phase of the cycle is the one that most people struggle with, right? But it's also the one that's most misunderstood. So we're going to explore that. And what I really want you to know from the start is you don't need to be suffering every month. If my story kind of spoke to you, if you resonated with that, or if you're already thinking, I have a really tough time with my pre-menstruum, it's ruining my life, I kind of want you to know that you don't need to be suffering every month. Your relationship doesn't need to suffer, your work, your livelihood, you're not crazy. And hopefully this episode will, bring some space and light to that for you. We're going to look at what's happening hormonally across this phase, what it can feel like, what is PMS, and how to care and support for yourself in this phase, and how to care for your partner. Hello and welcome to episode 6 of The Period Lesbian, a podcast about periods times 2. I am your host, Lizzie, and I'm so glad you're here listening with me today. This podcast is all about helping lesbians and queer people understand their menstrual cycles, their partner's cycles, and how that awareness can deepen connection and understanding with ourselves in our relationships, and just support us more deeply over time. So, firstly, what is the premenstruum? Like, what is this phase? This is in the luteal phase, so the last phase, sometimes I like to say with the L, last luteal, of our menstrual cycle. It's about a week to 10 days before your period is due. And if you follow the inner seasons model that I've been sharing, this is your inner autumn. Hormone-wise, progesterone is the dominant hormone here. Progesterone peaks at this phase and then it also starts to drop off. And progesterone is a soothing hormone. It's a calming down hormone. It's a slowing down hormone. And this is what it's doing to us in this phase, right? It's slowing us down. It's bringing us inwards. You know, compared to the first half of the cycle, where we've got that estrogen, that get up and go hormone, in the second half, those sort of rose-tinted glasses are coming off, and we're being invited to slow down and back into ourselves. So the first half of the cycle kind of gets us out into the world, and the second half brings us back in towards ourselves. And you might be thinking, well, Lizzie, I don't feel anything. I definitely don't feel calm in this phase of my cycle. I'm not feeling the calmness. I'm not feeling the soothing. And I totally hear you. And hopefully this episode will give you a more understanding of yourself, more compassion and grace for this phase, and also practical ways for you to support yourself or your partner. And secondly, perhaps listening to this phase, you'll start to see where some of that struggle comes in for women and menstruators at this phase of the cycle. You know, like, as I mentioned, our bodies are trying to slow us down. They're trying to bring us inwards and almost kind of unplug a little bit from the world. Like, you know, it's preparing us to bleed and go inwards before we then come around to another new cycle. And so naturally at this phase of the cycle, right, it's normal to feel a little slower. You know, it's normal to take a little longer to get going in the morning. Maybe you're feeling a bit more sleepy. You feel like you need a little bit of extra sleep. It's normal for your tank to kind of run out earlier. You just don't have the capacity at this phase of the cycle that you probably had the week before. So, you know, maybe you can't pack in as much at this in your day, this phase of the cycle. Equally, you're going to be naturally more introspective at this part of the cycle, a little less talkative, a little less interested in keeping up with all the activities of the people in your life. And our inner critic can be louder in this phase. This is the home of the inner critic. And what's really difficult about everything that I've just said is that the world is still expecting you to run, live, and be the same as the way that you were the week before in your ovulation or pre-ovulation phase, like in your inner spring or inner summer. You know, your friends, family, colleagues want you to be exactly as you were a week before, and then you are also putting pressure on yourself to be that way. Because it's all you know, right? That's what we've been taught. And so you're questioning why you're a little tired, why your body's feeling a bit sluggish, why you just don't have maybe the same oomph or motivation, or just the same shit's given that you did the week before, or the same passion, right? And it doesn't mean that you don't have motivation that exists, but that it just that how you feel about yourself and in the world is different. You know, you're questioning why, what is wrong with me, and perhaps you might be someone who shames yourself for it. But it comes back to this point of if you have a menstrual cycle, you're not meant to be the same every day. And our pre-menstruum is where our physical, internal, and emotional worlds and energies is sort of at odds with what the world expects from us. And that creates this tension. It creates a push or pull that you might not even be aware of. And I guess this is a bit of what I hopefully am going to shed a little bit of light on today. This discomfort that people experience in this phase of the cycle, and maybe some better understanding on why it's experienced that way, and that it doesn't have to be that way. Understanding this push and pull between what your body wants, your inner psyche, and then what the world is expecting from you. And learning what we're going to learn today can really change how you show up for yourself, how you relate to yourself, and how you're going about the world when you are in this phase. And that can then change a lot for you. So PMS, the first thing I want you to challenge and want you to walk away is this idea that PMS is normal. PMS is common, but it's not normal. This is something that was really brought to me, or that phrase by Claire Baker, where I did some training through the menstrual cycle with, and I love that framing, right? It's common, but it's not normal. We've been told things like, that's just the way it is. You're going to feel rubbish. Just get on with it. It's just that time of the month. There's nothing that you can do about it. And we've kind of normalized this suffering. We've normalized it and just accepted that we feel bad. Studies show on average it's about 80 in the Western world, about 80% of menstruators experience PMS. So it is common, but it's not normal. And so alongside these messages of you just got to get on with it, it just is the way it is, we've also been given messages like, hide it, it's something to be ashamed of or that we need to fix. We're told, don't let it impact those around you, or don't let it impact your life. And so we're feeling awful, and we're not having a nice time, and then the world is kind of telling us just to get on with it. And so we feel kind of wrong for feeling awful. We beat ourselves up. We're thinking what's wrong with me? And like I said just now, we're putting pressure on ourselves to maintain or find some sort of or what I shared in my story, some sort of consistency and stability and be the same and feel the same as we were the week before, when that's just not realistic for us. And that makes this phase just even harder. The physical, the emotional and mental bypassing we do of ourselves because the world expects us and has taught us to be the same every day. PMS, it's common, but it's not normal. And you don't have to suffer. You definitely don't have to suffer in silence. And there are ways that you can support yourself that look nothing like pushing through. What can PMS look like, or what are the symptoms of PMS? So pre-menstrual stress. It can be physical, emotional, mental, and you usually see these symptoms arise, about 10 days to a week before your period, and for some intensifying as it gets closer to their period. Symptoms like migraines, tender breasts, exhaustion, irritability, sensitivity, and that could be both emotional sensitivity, but also environmental sensitivity. I hate being in loud, crowded spaces in my pre-menstruum. Low focus, just difficulty concentrating, insomnia, particularly when that progesterone drops off just before our bleed. Progesterone regulates our sleep patterns, so it's common, not just having some of that inability to sleep, or sleep disruption, I should say. That's a better way of putting it. Cramps, low mood, anxiety, feeling anxious, anger or rage, and just generally feeling disconnected from yourself and the world. Particularly, as I've mentioned before, and if you like a visual, I'll mention at the end of the show, but I have that little free series where I go into the hormonal cycle, and so you can see the progesterone dropping off, but you're starting to lose this hormone, you're losing this buffering, and how is that maybe impacting us in a world that expects us still to be going at 110%. So these different symptoms, as I've explained, these aren't to be confused with PMDD, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder, also known as premenstrual depressive disorder, which is a cyclical mood disorder that also arises at this phase. I'm not going to go into that today in this episode. We've got a very special guest coming on to talk about their experience and to talk about PMDD and how to care for ourselves and really give that experience the care it needs. So if that is you, or you have a partner or a friend with PMDD and you really want to learn more, look out for that, because we'll cover that in the episodes to come. But with PMS, these different array of experiences and symptoms that I mentioned. And when it comes to the medical world, they don't really have a clear or definitive answer as to what causes the symptoms, what causes PMS. We're wildly behind on research on women's and menstruators' health. But if we take a holistic view, PMS can be seen as feedback from your body sort of saying, something isn't right, something needs attention, and something needs to change. And those changes might be physical, emotional, mental, relational, lifestyle, or stress related. And stress in particular has one of the biggest impacts on our hormones. So if you have a lot of stress in your life, it's absolutely going to show up in your premenstruum. But again, I know I'm going to keep reiterating this point, which it's like a podcast 101 no. But this idea about, if we think about, you live in a world that is expecting you to be like, go, 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 do. You are in a phase of your cycle where your body is slowing you down, bringing you inwards. Can you hear and think about how your body is at odds with what the world is expecting of you, and then you're internalizing that push and pull, or that friction. You're internalizing that as something that is wrong with you, and that in itself is going to intensify a lot of those symptoms. So that's something to really hold on to as you think about your own experience, or you maybe think about your friends or your partner's experience. And along with those physical symptoms of PMS, we also receive a lot of messaging about this part of the cycle, and how does that impact the lens that we look at ourselves. This whole like, oh, it's just that time of the month, she's hysterical, she's moody, she's bitchy, she's irrational. And this in itself, again, creates a lot of shame. It's like shame on top of shame. We're feeling like shit, and then we're also looking at ourselves through this lens of shame. And I think what's sad about that is that this phase of your cycle can actually be so wonderful and really powerful. You're being brought inwards. It's a time of connection and really feeling at home with ourselves. But because the world has never taught us about our menstrual cycles, it's never taught us how to work with our natural rhythm, and it's fed us a lot of negative negative opinions and a negative lens about our cycle, and particularly this phase, we miss out on how beautiful the connection can be with our cycle, and particularly in this phase. In this phase, we become a lot more discerning. As I mentioned before, those rose-tinted glasses are gone. Your bullshit meter goes up. You see things more clearly. But we haven't been taught to trust that or channel it. And so we question ourselves, and like that whole irrational, like, oh, she's just irrational. I think at times we think we're irrational. There's this beautiful phrase by Red School that they say, like, bleed on it and practice. It's a phrase, and practice. Bleed on it, meaning listen to what comes up in the premenstruum, but don't act on it immediately. Because sure, like, our premenstrual self can say some things like quit your job, leave your partner, move to the woods, move to the other side of the world. And then when you bleed, the wisdom comes underneath it that might be like, hey, you just need better boundaries. I really need more rest. I really need more meaning in my life, or I really need more connection. And that's the most beautiful, powerful parts of like our premenstruum and our bleed, which as we go through this journey together, we're going to really get into. This phrase brings wisdom, but we've not been taught it. We've been taught to fear it instead of trusting it and trusting ourselves. We've not been taught how to plug into ourselves. And so why does this phase feel so hard, right? Like, as I've already mentioned, there are a few things happening at once. Your body is trying to slow you down, and the world expects you to keep going. There's this mismatch. You're tired, which is normal. You're going to feel a little bit more tired at this phase of your cycle, but we label it as lazy. You might feel like you need space and then feel guilty. Like you're not allowed to claim any space, particularly for a lot of women and menstruators, we are nurturers, we're givers. And so to feel like you need to take some space for yourself, it's just like, who do you think you are? You feel more emotional. But then you think something's wrong, like you can't trust those tender emotions and you can't be with them. Before I understood this, this is a lot of what I thought was the problem. I thought there was something wrong with me. And I'd go through the list of the things that we were told that we needed to do to control all of that, like the slowing down, the feeling tired, the needing space, the feeling more emotional. I would try and eat better, move my body better, control my emotions, go to more therapy, and like really do the work. Like, I think women and menstruators are so good at doing the work. And then when we're not staying in this box that we're like, or this like this ideal that we've been told we should be, which is the same every day, steady, consistent, etc., I would internalize it like that there was something wrong with me, that I was crazy. And so after learning all of this and practicing cycle awareness and charting my cycle and learning the phases and what my natural rhythm was and therefore what to expect, my life completely changed, and my experience of myself changed, and my experience of my cycle, and my relationships changed, and my work changed, and my confidence. And it was like, for the first time, in a way that nothing else had. And I love therapy. I mean, and I love coaching. I'm a life coach, I'm the biggest advocate for all of that world. But cycle awareness and learning about my cycle and helping me be connected to me and my body, it really gave me the space to just be, and therefore learn what I needed and who I was in a way that nothing else did. And so this brings me on to another layer of why this phase can be so difficult. So we've got this big one that I just keep repeating about, living in a world that expects you to go, go, go and be the same when your body is slowing you down, etc. So you're at odds. And the second one is, in our pre-menstruum, we're being invited back into our bodies. We start to feel more and invited into this like deeper connection with ourselves. But many of us don't feel safe in our bodies, right? We don't feel good in our bodies. They're not familiar to us. This used to be a really hard one for me. I didn't want to be in my body. It did not feel good. I didn't want to be reminded that I had a body. And I also just didn't know how to be in my body, right? The world actively taught me to be separate from my body and to not feel, right? So like, we've learned to be disconnected from our bodies for lots of different reasons, and some of you, all of these things, and some of you will be, small parts of things, but diet culture, right? Diet culture disconnects us from our bodies pretty early on, the messages that we learn. Shame about our bodies, shame about our sexuality, trauma disconnects us from our body, and just being taught to ignore our needs, when we're little, being good girls, sitting still, holding onto our wees, drinking water instead of eating when we're hungry, being told that like have a glass of water, you're just thirsty, living off coffee or Diet Coke instead of eating. All of these different things cuts us off from our bodies and our impulses. So when this phase pulls us inwards and starts to make us feel more, it can feel very uncomfortable and very confronting, and we don't know how to be in it. And I think this whole thing about feeling as well, and feeling our feelings, is a whole nother episode. But we don't know how to feel our feelings. We're not taught that. And so people can describe this feeling of coming back into their body as feeling hypersensitive, feeling raw, feeling like their skin is crawling, like it just feels so awful. I've heard women say, I just feel so disgusting, and my heart breaks for them. And I've been there as well, where it just feels so uncomfortable. And then the word that they're using is, I just feel disgusting. They're feeling disconnected and they're feeling overwhelmed in their body. And so, maybe you can relate to that too, of that, like, it just not feeling nice, okay, and it feeling very wrong, or you feeling very wrong in your body. So yeah, if this is you, I totally see you. And I know how incredibly hard it can feel. And I also want to give you a little bit of hope that it won't always be that way. My experience, my clients, people that I know in this space have gone from hating everything about this phase, their body, their experience, the world, to feeling present, connected, and okay. So I just kind of want to give you that like little bit of glimmer of hope. Over time, this phase can actually become a coming home, and returning inwards every month, where you just reconnect with yourself in a way, and it can be quiet and an intimate reconnection with yourself. This is why tracking really helps, right? Having the knowledge, helping you, knowing what you need really helps, and learning how to care for yourself in this phase, and learning how to know, what days are really tough for you, and how to meet yourself in that, and how to care for yourself in the other phases, because that all impacts your premenstruum. The premenstruum is the one phase that is really impacted by all the other ones. Before we talk about caring across your menstrual cycle, I just want to lastly introduce the concept of the void. This has changed my life and a lot of my clients as well. The word, the concept, the language, it was coined by Red School, Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer, and it describes that experience usually around 2 to 5 days before your period, where progesterone is really dropping off, and you have very little hormonal buffering. When we think about ovulation, we've got in the combination all of the hormones peaking: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. In that first half, estrogen's really peaking as well. In those few days before your period, we've got very little buffering. I think I've said this before. This is like getting to midnight for men. They're tucked up in bed, those with the male hormonal cycle. You're out in the world, in a very stimulating world, in every way, shape possible. And so what you might feel at this point, the how you can experience the void, is, what is the point? What is the point of me? I can feel dark, it can feel flat, it can feel bleak. You can feel very raw and very exposed. It's very interesting that I'm recording this today, because I'm cycle day 25. So my bleed usually comes cycle day 26 or cycle day 27. And last night, I actually do great work at this phase of my cycle up to a point. It's like all the noise goes away and I get very focused and I can just get on. I relate it to that energy of where in this phase of the cycle you just get that urge to clean your oven or clean your fridge out. I get very focused and I just get on and do my work. But the void can come on quite suddenly, and I get this real sense of doom within myself. And it's this feeling of I am wrong. And I have learnt to notice it. And it is a big indication that I'm in the void and my bleed is just about to come. And I'm almost being invited to cross over. That feeling of raw and exposed, I have to say to people yeah, it's very real. In some ways you are very raw and exposed. You don't have those hormones buffering you. But you were out in the world doing things. And so I think there's two things I want to say about the void. One, just being able to have that word for it, to being able to name it, and Bethany and I as well, when she's had an experience and she can just see where she's slipping into it, because she's everything is wrong. It feels helpless and feels hopeless. Everything in her life feels helpless and hopeless. And I can really relate to that as well. And so can my clients. And so it's just having language for it that means you don't feel, it doesn't feel so scary. I think the language, first of all, and being able to communicate that with someone. The second thing is that it is a bit of an indication. It's a bit of this is the time to put your pens down. It's pens down, tools down. There is nothing to achieve here. And that's what I have to remind myself when it comes. There is nothing in this moment that you need to do or achieve. And when I try and do that, the feeling of the void intensifies. And so if I can, this is a time that I'm right, those work responsibilities gonna get pushed aside. Those life responsibilities. And this feels more important to me in this phase than it does almost on those first few days of my period. If I can go to bed, I will. How can I hibernate? How can I pull back from the world? This is, what I'd really encourage you to do if this is something that you notice and you experience. Because again, this can change your experience of yourself and your menstrual cycle as well. Like that alone can have a really big impact. So give that a go, just labeling it the void, and actually just going to bed, or your equivalent of bed. And I mean that as a representation of like letting go of some of the responsibility. Caring for yourself in the premenstruum. So how can you support yourself in this phase? If you're someone who's listening and you have a really tough time in your premenstruum, or your partner, the number one thing you can do is track your cycle. Track and chart your cycle. This is the cornerstone that will support everything. And that is tracking your cycle each day and noticing what days feel hardest. You know, when I first started doing this work, I noticed that cycle day 23 was the hardest day for me. It's when I would like lose touch with reality. But then I was able to go and put some boundaries around it. So what days feel hardest? What symptoms are showing up? What is feeling difficult? You know, what is happening also in your life around that time? And it's not just tracking and charting your premenstruum. You want to be charting every day of your cycle so that you can start to notice some patterns and get to know your natural rhythm. So charting your cycle is the number one thing you want to do. We're going to get into a bit of that as well in the next episode. Number 2, at this phase of the cycle, your number one task in your premenstruum, in your inner autumn, is to slow down. So in the inner summer, you know, I spoke in the last episode, it's about pleasure and connection. When you're on your period, the number one task is rest. In your premenstruum, it is to slow down. It's not to stop everything, but it's to reduce, you know, like create space for yourself. Create space in your day and recognize your capacity. I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. Saying no more, like this is the time to say no. You know, do not overbook yourself. Do not take on extra work. Do not cram your schedule. And don't try and be everything for everyone. So this is a time to say no. Like less is 100% more in this phase of your cycle. Prioritize rest if you can, in terms of like earlier nights, slower mornings, gentler movement, more quiet time. You know, I'm a runner. I'm probably not going to do interval running at this phase of my cycle. I quite like a long, steady run at this phase of my cycle, but I'm not going to do anything super intense. This is not the time to really push your body. And whilst something that's really important to me is that I never want to be prescriptive with women and menstruators and their bodies, because it's what we've been taught our whole lives. Everything's been so prescriptive around our bodies, and it takes us away from our own wisdom. You know, what I would say is really listen to your body in this phase, and also, you know, do what's right for you. And also, this is just not the phase to be causing more stress for your body. I think movement's important, but not creating more stress. I think the slower mornings is a really important one for me. And yeah, like just getting a little bit more sleep. Eating more. We actually need more calories in this phase. It's around 250 calories. I've seen different researchers say different things, but it's around 250 calories. And you'll also just notice that you'll be craving more certain foods. I really crave potatoes at this phase of my cycle, but like those kind of like more earthier, starchier foods. So like, can you really nourish yourself and give yourself and like honor your hunger? And also, if you're craving certain things, like how can you give those to yourself? We're not going to be restricting ourselves in this phase. Creating more space. Give yourself more time to get ready in the mornings. Give yourself more time in between meetings. Giving yourself more time to get to work. All of these things really help. You know, I don't know, not going into the supermarket at peak hour, perhaps, if you can. And communicate with your partner. Like, what does your partner need to know, or what does your team need to know? You know, I'm very vocal with when I used to work in corporate about what I needed from my team and what I needed them to know. And that might be, you know, time in between meetings. I need a little like less information, or I need a little bit more time to respond. So what do the people in your life need to know, and what can you communicate to them? And it might be just be saying, I'm entering my premenstrual phase. You know, I need a slower week this week. I might be more sensitive this week. Thinking about what you need and what you can share. and opening up that conversation. And equally, if your partner really struggles with this phase, is asking, like, how can I support you? Like, what would help? I think often it's, what can I take off your plate? Like, how can you support them to slow down? And also give them permission, because so often, we all struggle with rest. So much of our self-worth has been tied to our productivity, like living in a capitalist patriarchal world. It's all been about doing. And if we rest, we're lazy and we're wrong and we're bad. And so some of it is giving your partner that permission to take a step back and slow down and let them know that you've got it. And perhaps you're in that phase together and you can slow down together. Can you reduce your social plans, avoid big conversations, heavy conversations, and share responsibilities differently? If you're in a different phase of your cycle and you want to go out, letting them know that, like, I love you, and, like, it's cool for you to be at home if you want to stay at home. You don't have to come along, or just opening up that conversation. Cycle awareness helps to make it more collaborative, what we need and how we can support each other. We'll get into more of this as we go on through the season. One last thing in the premenstruum. Your premenstruum is very much like what you reap is what you sow. So, it's our inner autumn. And so just like in the autumn, farmers will harvest what they've sown, and nature will harvest what nature has sown earlier in the year. In this phase, it is exactly the same. So if you've been stressed the whole month, if you've been overworking, you've just been pushing it. Like, in the first phase of our cycle, we have more energy, but there is a limit. But if you've been pushing and go, you've not been resting, you've not been allowing for any downtime, you've not been eating well, you're definitely going to feel it here. Progesterone is very stress sensitive. And so this is why caring for yourself across the whole cycle matters. This is why charting your whole cycle matters. And hopefully over time, this is what you're going to be learning. If this phase is hard for you, I see you, just sending you so much love and hopefully giving yourself some grace. You're not broken, you're not crazy, you're not the problem. Like, you are not a problem to be fixed, and you're definitely not alone. But your body is communicating with you, right? And I really invite you to notice when you're in that phase, like, when does it begin for you? When do you start to notice the symptoms come on? How do you feel? How might your body be trying to signal to you to slow down or come inwards that you maybe in the past have just been pushing by and pushing through? What is it that you need? Like, if you could give yourself exactly what you needed and wanted, what would that be? And that might not be realistic, but can we start there, and then the curiosity and creativity of what that can be kind of builds from there, or comes from there. Just thinking about what you need. And if you could slow down just 1% more than normal, what would you do differently? And equally, if you were going to be kinder to yourself, just that tiny bit more kinder to yourself than you have been, and now that you've learned everything from today, now that you have this knowledge, how would you talk to yourself? Like, what might you give yourself? And just noticing, if you, in the slowing down, like, what comes up for you? What do you find difficult? This is all knowledge and all helpful. If you want to learn about the different phases, go back to episode 5, the episode previous to this, where I kind of go through each of the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. As I mentioned, I also have a free mini series where I teach you how to track and chart your cycle step by step. And I also go into what's happening hormonally across each phase. So if you like a visual, you'll find that really helpful. It's just 3 5-minute videos. You do have to, because I'm not very tech savvy, you do have to kind of make an account on my website. It's like a Wix account. And then almost become a member, but it just means, and then you do the program on there. I'm not very tech savvy, guys. And it works. It's been working. Anyway, I'll link that in the show notes. Next week, we're going to talk more about tracking and charting your cycle, yours, and then your partner's, and yours, and then how you and your partner can do that together, and start get you starting putting some of what we've been talking into practice, what you've been learning into practice. I hope today has been a fruitful episode. I know it's been a long one. I really hope you have a gentle week wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And I will see you next week. Thanks for being here.